Well, hi, and welcome back to a breezy and damp day here in the east of England. This video is part 3 in a series of videos I'm putting together on fire. And this week we're going to be looking at different ways of igniting the fire. So I've set a tarp up here. It's actually stopped raining at the moment, but it was raining quite hard earlier on, so hopefully if it does start to rain again, the tarp will keep the worst of it off. You know, I've got dry tinders and things around me. I really don't want them all getting wet, but we'll see. So this video really forms the middle stage, if you like, of this series. We've looked at tinders, now we're looking at ignition, and then we're going to go on to building your fire and keeping it maintained as it burns. I haven't got time in this video to talk about all of the different methods of lighting a fire. You know, there are just too many. So I'm not going to include them all. This is just a few of my favourites. So the first thing I want to talk about is the good old ferro rod. Okay, this is my favourite way of lighting a fire, and if you've watched any of my previous videos, you'll have seen me use this a lot. I'm a big fan of it. It's reliable, they're reasonably cheap, and they work. But basically what they are is a rod of ferrocerium, which is the same stuff you have in a cigarette lighter, incidentally. The little flint that you have in a cigarette lighter everybody refers to as a flint isn't actually a flint at all. It's not made of stone, it's made of this stuff. And it's basically an alloy of several metals. There are a bunch of metals called mish metal, which makes up most of what this is, and that includes a metal called cerium. Now, cerium's an interesting metal in that it ignites at a very low temperature, about 150 degrees. You just need something hard to strike against it to generate that amount of heat for it to combust. Okay? Cerium and the other mish metals are very soft, so what they do is they mix that with a couple of other things. They mix it with iron oxide and magnesium oxide, and that's just to make it hard enough to use. If it was too soft, it would be difficult to get it up to temperature in order to ignite it with a hard object. They often come with a striker, like this one does here, but I tend to use the back of my knife just because I've got something bigger and I have a bit more control over the strike, basically. So the sparks generated by a ferro rod are really hot. They're about 1600 degrees centigrade or 3000 degrees Fahrenheit if you work in Fahrenheit. And the nice thing about them is that they, because of the mixture of metals that are used in a ferro rod, they stay hot for quite a long time. And you'll see that when you strike it, you'll get these bright sparks which will stay glowing for a long time, which is a good thing because that heat is staying in your tinder where you need it. The next method I want to show you is the good old-fashioned flint and steel. Basically you have a piece of steel, a high carbon piece of steel. It's very important that the carbon content is as high as possible, which makes the steel very hard. A mild steel just wouldn't do it. It wouldn't generate the heat needed in order for you to create a spark. Okay, so you have high carbon steel and you have a sharp, hard rock. In this case, flint. But you can use quartz, you can use various other rock, but flint works particularly well because it is very hard, and when it's napped you can end up with a really nice sharp edge, and it's actually that sharp edge that you need. So the way it works is you strike your steel onto your piece of flint, or some people like to go the other way, hold the piece of steel and then strike your flint onto your steel, whichever way you choose to use. It's the same thing that's going on. The sharp edge of your flint is slicing off a tiny bit of that steel. And what happens there is, as it cuts that bit of steel off, heat is generated. A lot of heat. It takes 1400 degrees to burn steel. Okay. So that's how much heat is being generated. When you see a spark, that's basically a burning bit of metal coming off, okay? What the sparks are. So 1400 degrees, that's a lot of friction. That's a lot of energy that's creating that amount of heat. The other thing to say about it is that those sparks, although they are at that temperature when the two come into contact with one another, the spark cools down very, very quickly. So quite a nice, good, fun method of lighting a fire, but it doesn't produce a flame. You know, it'll produce a glowing ember on a bit of char cloth or on a tinder fungus. You know, you've then got to put that into some nest material and blow that into flame. All right, but it's good fun to do, and it's a traditional method, and you know, keeping the traditional methods going is a very good thing in my mind. All right. Now, I've obviously got a dedicated flint striker here. You could improvise. If you had a knife with a high carbon steel content with you, you could strike that onto a piece of flint that you found. You know, if you're able to, especially if you're able to break that bit of flint and get a nice sharp shard off it, you know, by striking those two together, you will obviously create sparks as well. All right. So that's something that, you know, in perhaps a bit more of a survival situation where you didn't have your gear with you. But perhaps you did have a pocket knife, or you had something that was made of a high carbon steel. You could create sparks from what you have with you. Right, next up, and while we're talking about traditional methods, it would be wrong of me to put a video together about making fire without including some form of friction fire lighting. There are loads of different ways to do this, from your basic hand drill, which is very difficult, and it's not a skill that I've managed to master, and I've only got myself to blame for that. I just haven't practiced enough. There are methods of making fire by friction using a plough technique, by rubbing one stick along another with a groove in it, okay, and creating friction that way. And then there's my favourite technique, which is the good old bow drill. It takes some of the effort out of making an ember by friction, and it's the method that I have had success with, so that's the one that I'm going to include. Okay, so the things that you're going to need for a bow drill set are your bow, and I selected a curved piece of hazel for this, and I have paracord as my bow string, and the bow acts as the driver for your spindle. The spindle itself, my one is about 5 inches long, also made of hazel. Now when this was first used, I literally with my knife just domed the end a little bit, you know, with the blade of my knife, and it's developed that shape through use. Okay, so it's become much more rounded now through use. The other end I sharpen into a point, and that sits in this interesting little thing here, which is my bearing block. Now some people you know, make a little divot in a piece of wood, and then the sharp end of that goes in there, and the idea is that the sharp end is much less friction because it's at a point, and there's much more friction at the bottom because it's domed, so that's the end that will create the heat, and you'll get less heat at the top end where your bearing block is. I decided to put a bearing in there just to take even more of the friction away at the top end. Alright, so all the friction is concentrated at the bottom. Alright, so those are 3 of the bits you need. The other bit you need is a fireboard or hearthboard. Now, I say hearthboard, I've been calling these hearthboards for years, but interestingly, I've noticed that other people out there call it a hearthboard. And I don't know whether I've been saying it wrong all these years or not. I just assumed that it was, you know, like in front of a fireplace, you have a hearth. That's where the name of this came from, hearthboard. But I might be well wrong there. But whatever it is, it's basically the working end. This is the working bit. This bit sits on the floor, and you, with a knife, you create a little divot, which you then burn in with your spindle. So the first time you use it, you know, you're going to, just as it is, set it up, and you're going to spin that with your bow, generate a bit of heat, and that will bed in, and that will shape, the divot there will shape, and the bottom of your spindle will shape so that they match in size. Okay. Once you're happy with that, once it's burnt in a bit, you then take a saw and you cut a saw cut down towards the centre of your divot, not quite to the middle, just back from the middle. Once you've done that, you can take your knife and you can just nip out those shoulders of that saw cut, and it's a good idea to enlarge it on the underside. Okay. And the reason for doing that is to create a little area where the dust can accumulate in use, okay, and that will become your ember once that ignites. But yeah, so just undercut it slightly at the slightly on the bottom. You can do all that with your knife. And then once you've done that, you can set yourself up. You can insert your spindle into the divot with the notch cut out, and then you're going to start spinning it and building up some material. Okay, so don't go too mad at this point. You're just going to keep rotating it. The dust will accumulate in that notch that you created and underneath it. And once you've built up enough, you're then going to start to increase speed, increase pressure. And now what you're trying to do is you're trying to get some more heat going on. Once that heat builds up, with any luck, it will start to burn and start to glow. You'll notice it because the amount of smoke will increase. Once that smoke starts to really increase, keep going, don't stop, keep going at it, and then when you think that there's a good chance you might have an ember, stop, carefully tap the ember out of the notch, being careful not to knock it away, and then you can insert that into your tinder bundle and blow it into flame. So friction fire is a good one to know how to do, and it's hard work but good fun, and you do get a real sense of satisfaction and achievement, once you finally do successfully make fire for the first time. It is a lot of work, so it's not the sort of method that I would use on a day-to-day basis, but it's nice to practice now and again, just so that you can do it. Okay, the next method is to use the sun to help you. So if you have a pair of binoculars, for example, or a pair of reading glasses or something like that, that you can concentrate the sun's rays using a lens, you're kind of halfway there. I've even seen people using water bottles, plastic water bottles filled with water as a lens. But basically the idea is that you use that lens, and I've just taken the end cap out of my binoculars here. It works perfectly. You can use that and the sun, and you can direct the sun's rays through this and concentrate them onto a point. Now I'm sure a lot of you may have done this as a kid out in the back garden, burning leaves and things like that. Well, yeah, that's exactly it. If you have a tinder pile and some form of lens, you could obviously create fire that way. Okay, and the better the tinder, the better your chances are of success here. I tend to use a bit of char cloth because char cloth burns really easily. It's black, so it absorbs heat very well, so it works doubly well with with a lens. And yeah, you can create fire that way. You can certainly create an ember which you can then put into a tinder bundle and then blow into flame. So that's a good one to use, but obviously you do need sunny conditions. You need to have, on a dull day, for example, it's not going to work. You have to have the sun out, and the warmer the day, the stronger the sun, the more success you'll have. But it's minimal effort on a hot day to create fire that way. So it's quite a nice one to do. So next up, and just for a bit of fun really, is a chemical method of starting fire. I have two chemicals here. I have a powder, this brown powder, which is called potassium permanganate, and I have a liquid here, a thick liquid called glycerol. And when the two of those are mixed together, a chemical reaction occurs and they heat up. So basically the chemical reaction produces the heat. The fuel is already here, it is itself. And once that heat gets up to a certain temperature, it will combust, okay, and you can start a fire that way. It's not a method that I would use on a day-to-day basis, but it's a bit of fun really. It's quite a nice one to show other people. So as always, thanks for watching. Hope you've enjoyed it. Don't forget to like, comment and subscribe below. That would be brilliant. That would really help me out. Take care, and I'll see you on the next one.